Okay, I think we can start. So my name is Deirdre Penfold. I'm the Executive Director of CAIA, and it is a great honor to be here today on a topic that I think is becoming more and more prevalent in all the discussions we are having. Currently, I'm in Geneva, being part of the negotiations of the Basel, Stockholm, and Rotterdam conventions, and it doesn't matter whether we are in a contact group or whether we are in a plenary session, but biodiversity is very much linked in with chemicals, with waste. A lot of discussion has taken place at the Basel Convention, discussions that we are having. So for us as CAIA, it really was an issue that we needed to look at. We know that there are a number of areas that need to be addressed. And so I want to say thank you very much to the speakers that are joining us today. But before I start, let me just give some context to the webinar today. As I say, there is a greater recognition of the role that biodiversity plays in maintaining a healthy environment, and how this impacts on the economic activity. With the adoption of the Global Biodiversity Framework in 2022, a roadmap was introduced for all countries to progress towards biodiversity preservation. One target in the framework, Target 15, and we certainly will be focusing on that today, is specific for reporting on biodiversity by business. In today's webinar, we will hear a presentation by the Department of Forestry, Fisheries, and the Environment on their program towards meeting the tasks of the Global Diversity Framework and their collaboration with business. Our other presenters will present information on the various global biodiversity reporting frameworks, and two of our members will give an overview on their journey towards minimizing the impacts of their operations on biodiversity. So a welcome to everybody attending the webinar, and also to our speakers. It is always a privilege, as I say, to host one of these, and we look forward to your interaction as well. It's not about us speaking, it's about the content of the webinars and the speakers' input. So a very warm welcome to you all. First on the list is the purpose I've dealt with. The second point on the agenda is the Global Biodiversity Framework, Target 15, and the international and national obligations. And so I'm going to hand over to Edward, who's the Deputy Director for Multilateral Coordination at the Department of Forestry, Fisheries, and the Environment. Edward, a very warm welcome. I must say I have had 10 days of engaging with some of your colleagues here in Geneva, and we really have spoken as well, not just about chemicals or about waste, but also biodiversity. So thank you very much for being part of the webinar today, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, and good morning once again to all in the webinar. Maybe I should just switch on the camera so that colleagues can be able to see the picture.
Not yet.
Okay, I don't know why.
No, we can see you.
Okay, so that's the face behind the voice that you're hearing now. Thank you. Yes, thank you very much for this invitation to talk about the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, particularly Target 15 of that document, and what the international and national obligations are. So just to give you some context, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework was adopted in December of 2022. This was during the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity that was under Decision 15.4. And it followed consultations that took as much as 4 years in negotiations process. It's a document that should have been adopted in 2020, but due to the sudden emergence of COVID-19, it couldn't be adopted at that time. And it should actually have been adopted, if it was adopted in 2020, it should have been adopted in China, in Kunming, but because of the COVID challenges, the meeting had to take place in Montreal, which is why the document is called Kunming Montreal. So it was hosted in Montreal, but it was supposed to have been held in China. So also to say that the issues related to engagement of biodiversity are not new. These are issues that, as far back as 2010, the Convention on Biological Diversity did have a global partnership for business and biodiversity, which was aimed at working towards greater engagements with biodiversity with business on biodiversity-related matters. This is a network of networks that link various initiatives so that they can share information and good common projects aimed at mainstreaming biodiversity into business. So the issues of business engagement in the work of when it comes to biodiversity has been on the platform for some time. Coming back to the Global Biodiversity Framework, this is a document that sets out ambitious pathway to reach the global vision of a world of living in harmony with nature by 2050. It sounds like a long time, but you will see before you know it will be 2035, before you know it 2045. The key elements of that document are that we have 4 goals which are to be achieved by 2050, and we do have a mission which is about halting and reversing the loss of biodiversity by 2030, and also including 23 targets which are to be achieved by 2030. So these targets are the ones that are keeping countries very busy in the work that they do, because they are to be achieved in the next in less than 5 years from now. And the goals and targets that are contained in this document are global in nature. So every country that wishes to contribute to these goals and targets can do that in accordance with its own capabilities, circumstances, and priorities. So it depends on how much you can afford, how much you have in your budget, and how much capacity you have to implement the elements of these goals and targets. And this is not a document for government. It is a document for everybody. It does rely on action and cooperation by government and, of course, all sectors of the society, including business. And when governments are implementing this document, they are expected to foster the full and effective contributions of everybody, including women, youth, business, civil society organizations, private sectors, and all other stakeholders. So this is a document that does not leave anyone behind. And of course, as already indicated, one of those targets is target 15, which begins with what governments should do. So as governments, we're supposed to take legal, administrative, or policy measures that are aimed at encouraging, and not only encouraging you, but also enabling you to ensure that you, one, monitor. Sorry. Can you still hear me?
Samantha, if you could just mute if there is someone that's unmuted, please. Go ahead, Edward. Thank you.
Okay,
Sorry about that.
So to enable business to regularly monitor, assess, and disclose transparently the risks and dependencies and impacts on biodiversity, and also to provide information that is needed to consumers to promote the consumption patterns that are sustainable, and to report on compliance with access and benefit sharing regulations in order to make sure that we reduce the negative impacts of business on biodiversity and increase those that are positive. So why is this target important? We know that every business is dependent on biodiversity. Business will need land, some will be using plants specifically, some will be using animals, some will be using all of them combined. But the dependencies are not always acknowledged or accounted for. And we have this data has been developed for that purpose, so that we do acknowledge these dependencies. We do get some reporting on these dependencies and what the impacts would be. And whilst this target applies to all types of business, but there is a particular emphasis on large and transnational companies and institutions, financial institutions, because of their size and areas that they operate from, and their supply and value chains and portfolios, because they have large enough net impacts on biodiversity, which is why it is mentioning them specifically, but it does apply to all types of business. And we need to monitor, by assessing and monitoring the impacts of these businesses on biodiversity, we can better understand the relationship with biodiversity and assess these impacts. Once these relationships have been assessed and disclosed, it becomes easier to take concrete steps to address them. But as government, we need to put in place measures that will enable you guys to do your work, some form of an enabling environment for business to operate from, which is why that's the primary role of government, to enable you to report, to monitor the impacts, and of course to disclose some of the issues that are important, particularly on impacts and dependencies of your work. And in terms of obligations that this the Global Biodiversity Framework has put on us at the national level, all countries that are parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity are to revise and update their national strategies, national biodiversity strategies and action plans, because this is the main vehicle for implementation of this convention. If you are familiar with the text of the convention, you will see Article 6 of the convention states very specifically, it talks about general measures for conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity, where parties are expected to develop plans, strategies, programs that would outline the conservation and sustainable use measures that they will be undertaking to implement that convention. And whilst they were parties were expected to revise these documents to be aligned with the GBF, they were also expected that by COP16, which took place in Colombia, they should submit these documents. But also, if you were not, as a country, you were not able to revise your document, your National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan during this period, you were to communicate national targets as a standalone submission by that meeting, which took place last year, as a way of expressing readiness to implement the Global Biodiversity Framework. And that's what South Africa did. We communicated 19 national targets aligned with the 19 global targets of the 23. If you go to Decision 16.1, you will see South Africa listed as one of the countries that have communicated national targets. But there are other countries that have gone beyond that, particularly those countries that are more advanced in technology, and of course in funding. They have already submitted revised National Biodiversity Strategies and Action Plan. So outstanding targets of those that we have submitted are those targets that deal with sustainability in agriculture. Target 15, of course, we didn't submit a target because we needed to go through this process that we are undertaking now with business, so that we don't submit a target that is not consulted, that is not agreed upon between us and business. And also target 16, which is about enabling sustainable consumption choices, target 22 and targets 22 and 23, which is about the participation by women and other groups in decision making, but also ensuring that women have a specific role to play, and that role is visible in the work on biodiversity and conservation. And what we're going to do further than that, after we have submitted the national targets, we are now going to revise our NBSEP, the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, We revised it in 2015 in alignment with those targets that were developed in 2010, and the period for that was from 2015 to 2025. So what we're going to do now, subsequent to the submission of the targets, we're going to now revise the document to which will now include what activities will be undertaken to achieve these targets, what kind of resources are needed, and many other issues that will be related to the implementation of that document. So this is the work that will be outrolling in the next few months, and we are going to have to consult all stakeholders to make sure that there are inputs made into this document by everyone. But there are other ways in which other stakeholders that are not necessarily governments can contribute to the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. The parties during the meeting in Canada did agree that they should invite other groups that are not part of national governments, like communities, subnational government, local authorities, intergovernmental organizations, non-governmental organizations, research institute organizations, business and finance communities, to develop on a voluntary basis commitments that can contribute to the implementation of the NBCEPs and to the Global Biodiversity Framework, and share them through a template which was adopted. So whilst for governments, we use the NBCEPs to contribute or to implement the GBF, those actors that are outside government who wish to develop their own contributions outside the NBCEPs can do so on a voluntary basis. Because as I indicated earlier, this document, the Global Biodiversity Framework, is a document that is there for everyone to implement, for everyone to contribute, because the biodiversity loss is an issue of concern to all of us. So we need to contribute positively towards implementation in various ways. So we have, for the development of the national target for Target 15, we have started engagement with business through the Business Unit of South Africa, with the aim of co-developing a national target for this particular target. We have developed a questionnaire to assess the status of reporting by business when it comes to biodiversity, and also to help us as the department to understand how, if some of the elements relating to biodiversity are already reported on. We did not, when we developed that questionnaire, make a distinction between who are large companies or who are small companies. We wanted to have a process which is as inclusive as possible, which is why we included everyone. And we have submitted this, we have shared this document with business, and thank you very much for the information that has been provided by business, and that information will indeed be used to try and formulate a national target for that target. We have learned in the last few weeks, because in some cases we have had a number of national targets for one target, but it might not necessarily be a very good idea, because when you have one indicator and you develop more than one target for that indicator, sometimes it gets very complicated, which is why now we seem to be, it might be a good idea for us to only look at one target as a start, so that we can see as we move forward implementing that target if there is a need for developing more targets. But when we were developing the national targets that we have already submitted, we did, through the South African National Biodiversity Institute, develop some draft targets which we did not necessarily share with or consult with business, but we're just putting them forward as drafts. That by 2030, perhaps we can formulate a target that says by 2030, business and financial institutions make investments towards halting and reversing biodiversity, or business disclose biodiversity risks and promote sustainable consumption and production patterns. But these were just drafts which are not, which can be changed in their entirety and come up with a completely new target, depending on what we agree upon between ourselves and yourselves. But when we develop that target, we also need to look at the kind of indicators that are already available. As government, we're expected to develop national reports to outline measures that we would have undertaken to implement not only the convention, but also at this point to implement the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. So we have developed at the international level indicators that are called headline indicators that are compulsory for every government to use when they report on all the targets that they would have submitted or they would have developed to contribute to the Global Biodiversity Framework. So one of those targets is the number of companies disclosing their biodiversity-related risks, dependencies, and impacts. And I think maybe this can also be helpful in assisting us in terms of what kind of national target we can have. But also as countries, we're also expected to indicate what are the legal and administrative and policy measures that we have that are enabling you as business and financial institutions to reduce the targets, and also other targets that relate to companies that are publishing sustainability reports in terms of the Sustainable Development Goal Indicator 12.6.1, and those of you who are involved in this work might know what this target is about, and the complementary indicator, which talks about how many organizations have signaled intent to start adopting recommendations that come from the Taskforce on nature-related financial disclosures. So this is basically what the expectation is from the point of view of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework as it comes to when it comes to to target 15, and we are very grateful to the commitment from the side of the business through our engagement with them, the information that they've provided through the reporting template that we have agreed with them. And that information is indeed very useful, and it provides us with information, basic information in terms of the kind of work that they're already doing when it comes to considerations of biodiversity in their work. Yeah, thank you very much for your attention.
Edward, thank you very much for a very comprehensive presentation. Colleagues, I'm going to ask that we keep our questions and comments to the end after all the presentations. So don't lose some of your questions that you might have relating to Edward's, his presentation. I think, again, thank you very much. Comprehensive. We understand the expectations, but I also at this point want to state that as business, and certainly the chemical and related industries that we represent, we are committed to working with government. We will be committed to working as business, and we would very much like to continue the collaboration going forward. We are a member of BUSA. I'm also a BUSA board member, so we're very involved with the process there. And again, our commitment is there to collaborate and work with government. So thank you again for a very comprehensive presentation. Colleagues, next on our agenda is an overview of international reporting frameworks. We have amongst us today David Everard, who is an independent consultant working in the field of sustainable forestry and water, as well as biodiversity management. He was previously the Divisional Environmental Manager for SAPI, where he was responsible for the implementation and management of sustainable development and the biodiversity strategy. David Everard, over to you. David, we can see your slides, but I'm not hearing you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much.
Apologies for that. My headphones stopped working for some reason. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for this opportunity to go through some of the frameworks, international frameworks for reporting biodiversity. There we go. Next one. So reporting, as Edward has pointed out, reporting has become very important. We know that business has been reporting for a long time, financially for a very long time, and then sustainability issues have been coming in more and more. And now biodiversity is becoming a very important aspect of corporate reporting. The first point, though, that we need to recognize is that these frameworks, and there are a lot of them out there, don't expect or don't tell you how to report on biodiversity. And in fact, you don't report on biodiversity, you report on the impacts your organization or activities have on biodiversity and the dependencies that organization has on biodiversity. So there's a subtle difference, but just to make it clear that, you know, reporting biodiversity doesn't mean to say you have to identify every single earthworm or bird species or frog species or whatever that you might be impacting. The other issue is because it's quite new and because it's attached to sustainability reporting, at this stage, reporting and disclosure is quite fragmented. There are many frameworks out there, but most of the main international frameworks are now beginning to include biodiversity into their scope. But as yet, there's still no standardized disclosure requirements. Having said that, the frameworks are beginning to converge in the approach and what they cover. So I have a little table here, which I won't go through in detail at this stage, but I've gone through 6 of the main reporting frameworks that are out there. And these are main international frameworks, and I'll go through each one in a little bit more detail, telling you what they are and what they cover. So if I jump right in, the first one that I came across, or that's beginning to get traction, is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. And it's part of the European Union standard for reporting or sustainable reporting. So it's a new regulation. It's replacing the non-financial reporting directive. And basically it mandates European-based companies to use the European sustainability reporting standards. And part of that standard, which is this CSRD, there's the E4, which is a standard specifically dedicated to biodiversity and ecosystems. It's kind of a strategic framework, and it tries to shift business practice to be more sustainable. So it kind of asks questions to try and get businesses to change their practices and change their attitudes towards sustainability and specifically biodiversity. It covers both direct and indirect impacts on biodiversity and the dependencies, the organization's dependencies on biodiversity. And it does cover risks and opportunities. So it looks at the risks, future risks, and it covers opportunities, you know, what one can do to mitigate, and you can report on those kind of things. The next one is the TNFD, the Taskforce on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. Now, this is very much similar to the TCFD, the Climate Change Task Force reporting. It's a risk mitigation framework. It uses what they call the LEAP methodology. So you locate, evaluate, assess, and then prepare targets or prepare mitigations and report on those. It covers both direct and indirect impacts and dependencies on biodiversity. But really, it's focused on disclosing risks and really disclosing the risks and opportunities to financial stakeholders. So it kind of translates a lot of things into what the financial impact will be on doing the right or wrong thing with respect to biodiversity. So it's strongly supported by financial institutions, and it's quite well used at this stage. More than 420 EU businesses have committed to using this, and this was 2024 data. So it is out there, and it is quite commonly used. There's the Carbon Disclosure Project, which is very well used because of the issues of climate change. And it was initially focused on climate change, but now it's expanded to include the scope of water security and deforestation, which in a way covers biodiversity. It's slightly different to a lot of the other reporting frameworks in that it's a questionnaire which gets filled in, and then it gets submitted by the organization and gets scored externally. So it's really an environmentally performance-based framework. It's largely looks at indirect impacts and dependencies, so it doesn't really look at the direct impacts, but it is used widely. It does cover risks and opportunities, and so it is quite an important framework, and those that are using it might want to adapt it for their reporting. Of course, the Global Reporting Initiative, GRI, probably a lot of large corporations in this country use this approach. It's a very comprehensive sustainability reporting framework, and last year came out with the updated biodiversity standard, which is the GRI 101. It's location specific, and it's also environmental performance. So it's one looks at where you're having an impact, you report on the impact you're having in a specific area, and so it is very clearly environmental performance related. It covers both direct and indirect impacts and dependencies, and it builds on the Taskforce for Nature, Financial, and the SBTN framework. So there's this one. It's quite overlapping.
David, sorry, can you just advance your slides as you go, please?
Okay.
Thanks very much. We're on CDP still.
Oh dear, because all right.
I can see GRI, so it's.
Oh, okay. So okay, I'm on GRI. So so I don't know. There's obviously a communication.
Go ahead. That's fine. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. So GRI has been widely used internationally for a long time, and the new biodiversity part of it, the biodiversity standard, is being piloted, and the GRI hope for full implementation in 2026. It's probably the most comprehensive and rounded reporting framework. Then we have the International Financial Reporting Standards, IFRS. This is very commonly used by companies reporting on. They use this approach to do their financial reporting. They've now come out with sustainability standards, and these sustainability standards do include biodiversity-related risks. So the real aim here is to provide a global baseline for sustainability, and it relates to financial disclosures. They are also working with the Taskforce for Nature Financial Directive to incorporate these more nature-related issues into their own reporting. And because it's financially focused, it only covers dependencies. So it doesn't really look at impacts on biodiversity. And then finally, I think we have the Science-Based Target Network, which is really more a platform which gives guidance for setting measurable science-based environmental targets. And it's aligned with planetary boundaries. And you know, that I don't want to go into all the planetary boundaries, but it's aligned with those. And so biodiversity being one of the biodiversity loss being one of the planetary boundaries is covered in this reporting. It covers direct impacts on biodiversity and also only includes indirect impacts through land and freshwater and ocean targets. So it's a little bit more varied. It is a new approach, and there are a group of pilot adopters for this approach. So in general, I've covered 6 of the main ones out there. I won't go through how they compare, but there is a table. I don't know if these slides will be shared with all the people that are attending, but you know that they are out there. They are generally cover a lot of biodiversity issues. There are some differences, but they are beginning to converge in the approach. Just to get into a little bit more detail quickly, this is the content of the GRI, the biodiversity reporting for the Global Reporting Initiative. And as you can see, there's quite a lot of issues that one's required to report on. So also about management disclosures, how you manage, how you measure, and then the actual identification process, locations, direct drivers of loss, and so on. So it is actually quite complex and extensive to do this reporting. And here's just an example of the first requirement. The organization shall describe its policies, its commitments, and so on. So reporting is you know, it's a serious undertaking for any organization. It's not just a little glib, you know, fill in tick box kind of questionnaire. One needs to commit to it, but with a bit of guidance and help, much can be done. So that's basically the reporting frameworks that I've gone through that are generally out there. There are probably a lot more that aren't covered, but we can't do everything. So these are the main ones. Thank you.
David, thank you very much also for a comprehensive presentation. I'm sure there are going to be some questions when it comes to question time, but thank you for the overview. It's much appreciated. Colleagues, as we move along, our next speaker is on the task force, which is item 4 of our agenda, the task force on nature-related financial disclosures, commonly known as the TNFD program in South Africa. And we are very privileged to have Yassine from the Banking Association of South Africa that is going to be presenting. He is the head of engineering of projects and tenders and the appointed biodiversity ambassador. Oh no, sorry, my apologies, got the wrong one. Sorry, Yassine, I've given you a new title today. You financial inclusion and public policy, senior specialist in sustainability at BASA. Over to you. Thanks, Yassine.
Yeah, I'll just put my camera on while I load the presentation. And just to check to see if all can see it.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, so I'll be speaking on the TNFD, a bit more detail on the TNFD, as well as our South African consultation group that's specific to the TNFD. BASA is a co-convener of the consultation group, and I would like to provide the presentation in that capacity or context today. So to begin, I'd like to take a step back, right, and let's look at the state of nature. So we see nature is not in a great shape if we compare it to past years. So we see a 69% decline in wildlife populations between 1970 and 2018. We see that between 300 and 400 million tons of heavy metals, solvents, and toxic sludge are dumped annually into the world's waters. And then over 1/3 of forests have been cut down, half within the last century. Also like to highlight the interaction between climate and nature. So we see that climate change is one of the main drivers of nature loss. And in turn, we see that nature loss exacerbates the climate change issue. So when we lose nature, we lose our ability to naturally respond to climate change. For example, physical risk with flood. If you degrade a wetland, you're taking away nature's capabilities to absorb excess water, and you'll have flooding that's more common. Also, the more obvious example is losing forests will result in the loss of our natural carbon sinks. So with that said, what's the importance of nature besides the moral obligation? That it has real financial implications, and we see that between or rather of $44 trillion or over half of the global GDP is moderately or highly dependent on nature and its services. So we see that business has a dependency on nature. Business relies on clean water. I think the water issue is becoming a particular problem in South Africa. But other than the obvious water, we see that businesses and different types of business, of course, relies on fertile soil, climate regulation, and probably more relevant to the agricultural sector is pollination. And similar to climate, we see that nature poses risks to business. So the loss of nature creates physical risks, increased flooding, for example, transitional risks. As we see policy and legislation become strong in this area, that poses a challenge for business and ultimately a risk. Legal challenges as well as reputational risks that are starting to arise. I think these are gaining much more prominence, and we see this, more civil society, NGO and activists are becoming more vocal in this area. And then we see the rise in disclosure, and I think this is very evident in the last two presentations. So both from a let's say a government mandatory regulative perspective, as well as a voluntary perspective, there's pressure for businesses to start measuring, managing, and ultimately disclosing their impacts as well as their dependencies. We're seeing a lot in the voluntary space, and now I think worldwide trend is that it's now moving over to the mandatory phase where it's been imposed by governments. The other important factor for business in taking into account nature is that it can make it can make business more resilient. So healthy ecosystems reduce supply chain disruptions. It could lower costs and ultimately, as I said, make you more resilient. So if we look specifically at the chemicals industry, we see that they have a medium dependency on nature. They're kind of in the middle of the table, but not to downplay the dependency. I think all sectors are relatively highly dependent on nature, and we see the climate sector both from a direct dependency as well as in the supply chain around that high to medium dependency. So now just to spend a bit more time on the TNFD and specifically the recommendations. So just following on and building on what David said, it is a global market-led science-based initiative. So it was developed by about 240 organizations or companies and with the assistance of 19 knowledge partners. So it's not created, it's created by business for business. It's a framework to help business then identify, assess, manage, and disclose nature-related dependencies. That includes the impacts, risks, as well as the opportunities. So it's trying to move away from, previous thinking where we focus solely on risks to looking at our dependencies as well as the opportunities. And I think the important part here to highlight is that it's not only focused on disclosure. It is a big element, but it also helps you to identify and assess and manage those impacts, risks, and opportunities. It consists of 4 pillars, which aligns to the TNFD or TCFD rather. And I'll go in the next slide. I'll go into the detail of these 4 pillars, as well as the LEAP approach, which is an optional structure, more of a methodology on how you can go about assessing, identifying and managing your risks. It's sort of an assessment guidance. I think the important part to highlight here is that it aligns with obviously the TCFD, but also the ISSB, the GRI, as well as the goals of the GBF, which Edward spoke to, and I think we can all appreciate that, this is a means or a method of business using the TNFD to disclose, which then ultimately speaks to the GBF. Another important point to highlight probably at this stage is to say that the FLS Foundation, which is responsible for the ISSB, has just recently entered into an agreement to collaborate on nature reporting. And this is part of their view to expand their work on S1 and S2 to look maybe specifically or part of that 2 structures in a reporting or in a framework that looks at nature specific. This also, the TNFD also signed agreements with GRI to collaborate. So more on the recommendations. As I said, it's organized into 4 pillars: governance, strategy, risk and impact management, metric and targets. And those familiar with the TCFD will see that it follows the same 4 pillars. It has 14 recommendations as opposed to the TCFD's 11, but they do build on the recommendations of the TCFD. So under governance, organizations are expected to disclose how oversight of nature-related risks and opportunities is integrated into leadership structures. For example, the role of board and management. On strategy, focuses on how nature-related issues affect the organization's business model, financial planning, and overall resilience. Similar to the TCFD again, it encourages scenario analysis to explore different nature-related futures, especially in high-risk sectors. And then on the risk and impact management, it looks at how organizations identify, assess, and manages its nature-related dependencies, impacts, and risks. And we'll look at in the next slide how the LEAP framework can help identify these risks and impacts. The final pillar is the metrics and targets. This pillar requires organizations to disclose their metrics they use to assess and manage these risks and opportunities, along with any targets they set, such as nature positive goals or how it even aligns with the Global Biodiversity Framework. And again, the TNFD recommendations encourages organizations to disclose both their risks and dependencies. So just to highlight what David mentioned in the previous presentation. Altogether, like I said, the TNFD recommendations provide a framework to, for better decision making. So it's not only focusing on disclosure, it's really to help your organization to understand and disclose how they interact with nature. So on the LEAP approach or methodology, if you're using the TNFD, it's not compulsory to use the LEAP approach, but it is a recommendation. And it's basically to support organizations in an understanding and, to do a deep dive in the methodology on uncovering your risks and opportunities, dependencies. So the first step, and it's the L in LEAP, is locate. Here, an organization identifies where its operations intersect with nature, and this can be by geography, sector, or value chain. The goal is to pinpoint priority locations, especially those in ecologically sensitive, or exposed to nature risks. And here we see how the TNFD then interacts with other standards. So you can use tools like the Integrated Biodiversity Assessment or the Aqueduct Water Risk Atlas to support you in this step. The next or the E in LEAP is evaluate. So this is where organizations assess their dependencies on ecosystem services, for example, water, and the impacts their operations have on nature. So these assessments can be both qualitative or quantitative, and it helps reveal the extent to which nature underpins the business continuity. The A, which stands for assess, this is about identifying the risks and opportunities that arise from those dependencies and impacts. So risks can be physical, it can be transitional, or it can be systemic. So very similar to how we view risks in the climate change space. And then also just to highlight, in this phase, we also look at the opportunities. So the potential to, for example, look at investing in nature positive solutions, or how would you as a business enhance your resilience. The final stage is to prepare. So this is about how does once the assessment is done, once the evaluation is done, then how do you go about setting clear targets that addresses the issues that you identified. And this could follow the AR3T hierarchy, which is to avoid or reduce, looking to regenerate or restore. And then this step also includes the disclosure. So you don't have to disclose everything you've uncovered on during the LEAP methodology. You will just then disclose those that you would like to, or those that you deem material, and those that then speak to the recommendations that we discussed on the previous slide. And again, just to emphasize that the LEAP helps integrate nature in a strategic and a financial decision-making sense, and it's not, again, about disclosure. It's about building that resilience and then contributing to the business's long-term sustainability. So that brings me to the TNFD consultation groups. A TNFD consultation group is an informal group of institutions at a national, or in some cases we've seen at a regional level, who are interested in the work of the TNFD and are willing to participate or to understand more around the TNFD. So it centers maybe around a lot of capacity building. What a consultation group looks to is encourage interested institutions to learn together about how to identify, assess, manage, and nature-related risks. It might be for sharing best practices. It encourages others, to become involved, and cross-pollination. That could be across government, finance, various sectors. And also to highlight this, if you join a TNFD consultation group, there's no obligation to become a signatory or to adopt the TNFD recommendations, and there's no cost as well. So basically, maybe just to sum it up, if you are interested, maybe not even in TNFD, just in the nature aspect, you can join a consultation group. You get to learn more about the TNFD, compare what you're doing with peers, compare what to other industry sectors, and see how best a consultation group can support you through this journey. So it's a central hub of support. That's country specific. So you're getting country specific examples and practices. There is about 20 consultation groups globally, and only 2 in South Africa, with only 2 in Africa, with South Africa being one. So I'll speak a bit more on the South Africa TNFD consultation group and currently the process on where we are in establishing this. So it's co-convened by the Banking Association as well as the National Business Initiative. But very similar to the TNFD recommendations, we wanted to be market-led, and thus it is being built around a community of practice. So we want organizations that are interested to join, or that are willing to join the TNFD consultation group, to tell us what they want to learn, or to tell us what they need support on, and then we can tailor a work plan to speak to that. And obviously we see this as a journey, so that will mature over time. We see us focusing broadly on 3 areas. So that's awareness. So at the highest level, creating awareness on nature impacts, dependencies, risks, and then the TNFD recommendations. But also there's a lot of other initiatives that provide support to businesses around the TNFD, and it's creating awareness around these initiatives and which will best suit your organization, where you are on your journey. I think that relates to the next focus area, which is capacity building. So we don't have a formal, training a portal, for example, but we see capacity building through that peer learning, through webinars, or any other area or initiative that comes through the membership. And then the third area of focus, and maybe the less tangible area of focus, is to influence. So we ultimately want people to influence organizations and business to be more nature aware, to use frameworks like the TNFD, and to ultimately become more sustainable. Where we are in the TNFD South Africa consultation group establishment process is that we are still in the inception phase. So we do currently have a draft terms of reference, and we currently do have a survey that's out to collect information on developing this work plan. So we want to, essentially what we want from the survey is to understand where you are in your journey, what types of topics are you interested, the themes you're interested, how we can deliver the capacity building program that we want to put together. And therefore, I would like to encourage all organizations and members that are online today, if you are interested in the consultation group, please get in touch. We'll happily share the survey to you. We encourage you to join, give us your input, and you also have an opportunity to look at the terms of reference and, see where you can make inputs if you do have. And again, there's no formal commitment that needs to be done or made. There's no obligation for you to use the TNFD. It's very much a learning exercise or initiative. And with that, I provide my email address as well as the link to the survey, and we have shared the slides, so you are able to interact with that survey. But happy to answer any other questions that you may have. And once again, please join the consultation group. Thank you very much.
Yassine, thank you very much for a very good presentation. The enthusiasm and the good understanding of the topic comes across very well. We'd like to appreciate the work that is done by BASA as well as NBI. And also, I must say, the words resonate very well with me on the TNFD, which is a science-based initiative. This is something that we're pulling through in all our negotiations, to have a science base to whatever comes out. I think the words sustainability, deforestation, water security, waste are all, words that we use regularly in all our discussions. And then I think the issue around voluntary versus mandatory, I think we're seeing, how, as you said, the measurability, the managing of that, and then the reporting. And as we've seen in some of the other areas within the environment, where it becomes initially is voluntary, and there's a good collaboration between government and business, and eventually does become mandatory, as long as we walk that path together. So thank you very much for that, and I encourage anybody wishing to become part of the consultation group. That would be fantastic, and I'm sure Yassine would welcome that. Colleagues, we have half an hour left, so I want to hand over to our members. And the first one that is going to be presenting is Bradley Thorpe from Interwaste. And this is the title I was going to give Yassine, but Bradley is the head of engineering of projects and tenders and the appointed biodiversity ambassador for the Interwaste business. I just need to say that I actually did a visit to Interwaste, but unfortunately couldn't see the project. So we really look forward and encourage our members to share with us. So Bradley, over to you.
Thank you, Dita, and thank you too for the opportunity. Yes, so I'm Bradley Thorpe, head of EPCD for Interwaste South Africa. And yeah, we were asked to just provide, I suppose, a snapshot view in terms of some of the activities and initiatives that Interwaste as a business are implementing in South Africa. I'm not going to focus solely, although I will touch on elements thereof in terms of the reporting and then programs, etc., but to provide you a more holistic view in terms of what we're doing. And that's specifically in terms of some of the voluntary commitments and initiatives that we have implemented. And I think in that vein, I think it's important to give some context to the fact that Interwaste is a subsidiary to the Sasol Environment Group. This is a large French multinational waste service and environmental services provider with a footprint in France, other countries in Europe, South America, Singapore, the Middle East, and now in South Africa or Southern Africa. And that the group has its associated group biodiversity strategy, its own objectives and targets. And since Interwaste's acquisition by Sasol, these objectives and targets and related requirements for reporting and disclosure have trickled down into our own business. It was a bit of a shock, at least initially. We saw the veracity and detail with which we were required to feed back on our extra financial data, including biodiversity back to France, really did balloon. But I think everyone's on board and we are familiar enough with what that reporting looks like at this point. Just also by way of context is to note that within the Sasol Group, they have 6 internal ecologists appointed within the business and a further 30 biodiversity ambassadors appointed within the group. And that is to sites that are formally committed in terms of the current commitment cycle for the Act for Nature International Initiative. You'll hear me mention Act for Nature at several points throughout this brief presentation. So just to contextualize that, Act for Nature is an initiative led by business networks with scientific partners, other environmental NGOs and public bodies. And its objective is to develop and mobilize companies to act in favor of biodiversity through commitments supported by their CEOs. And again, this program has its roots in France and operates on a 5-year planning and implementation cycle. 2 of those 30 group biodiversity ambassadors reside here in South Africa for the 2 sites that we have committed at this stage until 2027 to Act for Nature. Approximately 15 biodiversity champions have also been appointed and come on board in South Africa. And these are parties across all depots and at all levels of the business with a passion for biodiversity and who really want to get involved and help drive our biodiversity initiatives. We're also very excited, or I'm at least very excited, that we will be employing our first internal ecologist in our South African business, hopefully by the end of next month. But also, I think it's important to note, and I think the previous speakers have alluded to this on several occasions, is that we adopt a holistic view in respect of acknowledging and recognizing the interconnectedness of biodiversity, climate change, energy, pollution, and water management. And as a group, we have clear goals, KPIs, and action plans for each of these environmental aspects. I think what we also acknowledge is that sustainability can be financial in a sense. And the group in this regard has 4 sustainability-linked bonds. And in the context of today's webinar is to note that they are one of the first, at least in France, to tie bond conditions to biodiversity-related performance requirements and indicators. In terms of the group reporting, the reporting is effected per EU sustainability reporting standards. At this stage, the group has approved targets with the SBTi for climate. They are at this stage pursuing SBTN alignment for water-related targets, and also potentially at some stage, not at present, but into the future, for biodiversity and biodiversity targets. And also, all the groups or all the operations within the greater group are held accountable for extra financial reporting and results. Just very briefly then, if we look at some of the biodiversity-related targets within the group, and that then trickle down and impact our business locally, is that required to have 70% of our authorized land area or operations subject to a biodiversity diagnosis. My apologies, that's a direct translation, but that is in essence a biodiversity baseline assessment. So a measure of exactly what species, whether those are floral or faunal, do exist on our sites, in what numbers and in what proportional numbers to one another. The second high-level target of the group is to ensure that we have no pesticide usage on 100% of the sites by the end of 2027, is to ensure that we identify, report and limit wildlife traps in the business by the end of 2027. This was a new notion for us, certainly in South Africa, maybe something that they are more experienced with in France, but as the name suggests, a wildlife trap is any structure or impoundment, etc., where an animal could become entrapped and perish if they are not protected or guarded or mitigated. Importantly, in terms of the next target, is to have 30% of the facility or operations areas classified for environmental protection purposes. So to set those aside, give them a level of protection, and that will not be further developed going forward. To also then have more than 30 developments or practical on-the-ground actions in terms of promoting conservation, differentiated management techniques perhaps, or creation or rejuvenation of habitats and microhabitats over 5 years, and that's to the end of 2027, is for each site within the group to implement and roll out at least one local awareness raising campaign in relation to biodiversity and other conservation related issues per site. And again, like I've mentioned, and I'm going to go into a bit more detail, is to ensure that of the 30 sites within the greater group that are committed to act for nature within the current planning cycle, is to ensure that we achieve 100% in terms of whatever actions or commitments we've made to that cycle for this particular period. I think in terms of the implementation of the biodiversity strategy, and we really are seeing this in South Africa as our campaigns grow, is to partner. And I think you can just see a small snapshot of the partnerships that exist, certainly in France and Europe, in relation to the biodiversity strategy and implementation thereof. If we look then, just again, a snapshot, I'm not going to go into the level of detail that the previous speakers perhaps have, but if you look at the biodiversity-related targets of the group to the end of 2027, and you look at some of the impact metrics that are tracked and reported on in terms of biodiversity and ecosystem change, you can see that they are many and varied. I think the level of reporting and veracity of reporting goes far beyond what you're seeing here in terms of what we need to feed back to Sasol in France, but they're tracking metrics like proximity of our operational sites to sensitive, protected or key biodiversity areas. In terms of the number of sites in proximity to those areas, what is the proportional land area associated with that proximity? We're looking at what proportion of the land or surface area of our operational sites within the group have been formally committed to some level of protection or conservation status within the group. We're looking at the use of pesticides amongst all the different operations within the groups. We're also tracking whether there's an understanding of the presence or potential presence of alien and invasive species on those operations, and tracking which of those sites actually have active plans to eradicate and manage those alien invasive species on their sites. We've spoken about the wildlife traps. That is something that is tracked and reported on to group level. And then we're also looking at the voluntary developments, practical actions on the ground in favor of biodiversity, as well as the level of awareness raising that is implemented across the group. And again, that all trickles back to the extra financial reporting implemented by the group.
Bradley,
Yes.
sorry, I'm just looking at time. So we've got another speaker as well. So if you could have a look at conclude in the next 4 or 5 minutes, that would be wonderful. And it would be great to see your project. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll speed it up. This is just a slide in terms of the group's journey in respect of biodiversity and environmental protection. I think from its very inception, the owner, Joel Sachet, appointed an ecologist as far back as 1993. That group of individuals currently sits at 6, and they really do support the activities and rollout of the biodiversity strategy within the greater group, including Interwaste. Our journey, certainly by way of that acquisition, has only really started 2022, 2023, as these commitments, these voluntary commitments to Act for Nature trickle down into the various subsidiaries. And that's kind of where we are at the moment. And I have no doubt that our journey and progression and level of involvement in biodiversity protection and promotion will only increase, as it has logically in France since the early 1990s. Very quickly, that team of ecologists that sit in France, they roll out the strategy. They are available and supportive of the activities and rollout of the activities within all 30 sites in the group, 2 in South Africa that are committed to Act for Nature for the current cycle. And they also manage our EcoCert certification at 6 of the larger operational waste management facilities in France. We are growing that team and expertise, like I mentioned, in South Africa to ensure that we are not solely reliant on the French expertise, or do not have to subcontract consultants and ecological specialists in South Africa. This is just a very quick snapshot then internationally in terms of the sites that are committed to Act for Nature for the current cycle. And we have our 2 out of those 30 sites sitting here in South Africa. The one is our Interwaste Germiston hub and head office. It is an operational waste management facility in the heart of industrial Germiston. And the other is our Klinkerstein Waste Management Park out near Delmas. Very quickly then, there's various areas of commitment that one can choose from when you are developing your action plan for Act for Nature. We have chosen the first 2 in terms of implementing practical actions at ground level to promote and enhance biodiversity. And the second area of commitment is very much in the space of biodiversity awareness raising and capacity building within our business. These are just some of my insights in terms of having walked this journey for the last couple of years in terms of implementation of an effective strategy. I think it's important to have very clear targets and objectives. But very much linked with that is to ensure that you have an understanding and availability of budget to support those targets and objectives. Very important to partner. We are a waste management business. We have had to partner with various entities like Sanby, other specialist ecologists, etc., in terms of getting to the point that we are at as a business at this point. Important to understand your baseline in terms of what your biodiversity looks like at the inception of any project on the ground. Again, to ensure that you are monitoring, that you are able to report, and that the activities are independently audited, to ensure that you're not greenwashing, but ultimately to act in favor of biodiversity and effect a positive impact at ground level. This is just a snapshot of some of the practical actions that the business is implementing in favor of biodiversity. This picture to the top right of your screen, this is at our Germiston facility. Again, this is in the heart of industrial Germiston. We had 2 manicured kikuyu lawns, each approximately the size of an Olympic swimming pool, just to give you a reference point. And we are creating what we call our biodiversity hotspot with various collaborators. Started, again, very humble beginnings, planting of suitable indigenous trees, decided upon in collaboration with Sandy and other specialists. And this is a photograph that was taken late last year of Area 1, and I think you can see the difference. It's not often you'll find an area like that with the kind of biodiversity that it presents in industrial Germiston. Just very quickly as well, in terms of the aggregate for the walkways, we sourced this from one of our customers. It is a waste-based aggregate that we've implemented and integrated. We've also implemented or installed bat roosting stations at a couple of our sites. We're happy to say that we have had uptake. It's Cape Serotyne bats that are roosting effectively in those roosting stations. This has been a real, aside from the direct ecological services offered by bats, I think it's been a really good catalyst in terms of promoting discussion around our biodiversity initiatives in the business and creating a bit of hype in respect of all the related activities that we are implementing as a business. And this is certainly this is something.
Bradley, are you just about concluding?
I'm nearly there.
Please, I don't want to lose our last.
No, 100%. Just very quickly then, in terms of awareness raising, I'm not going to go through all of this, but it really is a big component of what we're implementing as a business. I think as an employer of many individuals and as a service industry with many customers, there is a potential for large impact. I spoke about understanding your baseline. This is something that we've done comprehensively at both of our sites to this. And again, understanding that baseline in terms of tracking and measuring the improvement of these projects and initiatives going forward. I think I've discussed a lot of this already, Deirdre. I'm going to end there. Thank you for the opportunity. But yeah, maybe one last parting comment is that these initiatives might seem small on their own, but I think in aggregation with other like-minded industries and activities, I think there is room for large positive impact.
Right, I'm sorry to have rushed you, Bradley, but there are going to be many more opportunities going forward, in particular around showcasing what our companies are doing. And I really do appreciate the presentation and look forward to walking that journey with you going forward. Maybe before I hand over to Sasol, I just want to state that we will be introducing a biodiversity award from next year onwards. So it would be great that we walk, as I say, the journey with companies and get more information, and I think that would stand us in good stead. You would have heard Edward say that the chemical industry has provided quite a lot of information through that survey that was done, so we're really on board, and as I say, we need to collaborate and work together. So last but not least, I'm going to hand over to Valerie Carlser from Sasol. She's a Senior Manager Environment, She and Risk. So Valerie, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I've been requested to provide a 10-minute summary of Sasol's journey on biodiversity. So in the interest of time, I'll really provide a short background and summarize some of our recent initiatives and activities. I'll also focus a bit on some of the species we've identified on our sites, as well as protocols and frameworks that inform our management monitoring reporting approach. Sasol, as a large energy and chemical company, has a long-standing focus on biodiversity, particularly awareness and conservation. Since the early 2000s, we've however undertaken targeted biodiversity activities and with a specific focus during major developments as well as expansion projects. Aspects that shaped our approach was really the Biodiversity Act, the first biodiversity framework that was published at that stage, as well as the International Year of Biodiversity in 2010. So efforts were initially driven by legal compliance and biodiversity management plans. Considering that our operations are located in the Free State, or our South African operations are located in the Free State in Mpumalanga, we are also based in the grassland biome, of which only 1.7% is formally conserved. and this is also home to several rare data species. So we recognize that our footprint impacts biodiversity, and conservation is vital to protect these species and maintain a healthy ecosystem health. Next slide, please. Sasol is committed to using resources responsibly, preventing pollution, and managing land and biodiversity. That's within our operations as well as our surrounding fence line communities. So to understand the impact of our activities on biodiversity, we've conducted various studies and monitoring surveys at our individual sites over the years. These have included asset inventories like land cover, soil, wetlands, rivers, birds, mammals, plants, etc. We also reference the IUCN Red List, that is a global inventory that assesses the conservation status and extinct risk of species. On the right-hand side there, you'll see some of the species that have been detected in our facilities. I think worth mentioning is the serval cats, of which the highest population density globally is recorded in Secunda. We also have 2 conservation areas in Sasolburg that host 14 different wildlife species. These facilities are open to the public with free access, facilities for hiking, cycling, and picnicking. The intent is really to promote conservation awareness in our communities. Next slide. Right, we also have a large conservation area close to our Secunda plant that hosts various game species. Included there, we have a conservation area that's inclusive of a rhino camp. And since the introduction of the white rhinos to our site in 2017, we've celebrated the birth of 5 calves, bringing the total rhino population to 12. The team is really doing excellent work there, and the successful breeding program highlights the positive conservation results. Next slide, please. I think the question here is, are we doing enough? Right. So in the latest biodiversity disclosure report that was released in 2023, Sasol ranked 7th out of 294 JSE listed companies and state-owned enterprises. We scored a total of 11 out of a maximum of 32. I think it indicates we've done some work in this area, but there's definitely still a long way to go. We have also recently conducted a gap analysis comparing the 2023 Sasol Biodiversity Footprint Report against the requirements of the TNFD, and we've had long discussions earlier this morning from the previous speakers. So the intent is really to use these recommendations for implementation to improve our future reporting as well as biodiversity practices. We also report on other reporting frameworks like the DJSI CDP that I won't go into detail at this stage. In 2023, Sasol partnered with the Endangered Wildlife Trust to conduct an initial biodiversity footprint assessment that's aligned with a biological diversity protocol. The intent was really to do a desktop assessment to evaluate our direct biodiversity impacts, and the focus was on our 2 main facilities in Sasolburg and Secunda. As part of this process, data gaps were identified that we'll action in future. Normally, your BD protocol focus on ecosystems as well as species level impacts, but as part of this exercise, we really had a main focus on the net ecosystem impacts due to the availability of data. The BD protocol has helped us to establish a baseline of our biodiversity and also to inform future conservation and impact mitigation efforts. Next slide, please. You might ask, what is the BD protocol? So in this slide, it really provides an overview. It's a standardized accounting framework that outlines clear steps for quantifying biodiversity footprints, tracking changes over time, and enable consistent reporting. It's a 7-step process where you basically set your assessment boundaries, You develop your impact inventory by looking at your ecosystems as well as material species and the impact that your business has on these. Then you assess the impacts, looking at both positive and negative impacts of these ecosystems and species. And then you measure and gain, build statements, validate, verify, report, and manage. I think the time-intensive steps is really 2, 3, and 4, because to execute those, you really need to understand the impact of biodiversity or the impact of operations on your biodiversity footprint, and that's it was really a lengthy exercise to do that part. Next slide, please. So the findings from our biodiversity footprint assessment indicated that we have approximately a 12% equivalent positive biodiversity footprint for the Secunda and Sasolburg operations that were part of the assessment. This is very much in line with the biodiversity footprint profiles of companies assessed using this protocol. On the left-hand side, you'll see as part of the process, you basically look at your ecosystem conditions, where the white areas are fully degraded and modified, and then the various shades of green shows areas with lesser degree and impact. Next slide, please. Biodiversity footprint was also broken down per ecosystem, which is the Central Free State grassland and wetlands, the Soweto Highland grassland and wetlands. I won't go into this detail for the sake of time now. Next slide, please. We've also, as we continued our journey, realized that capacity building is really key to advancing biodiversity practices. We then partnered with the Endangered Wildlife Trust to develop biodiversity material. The content basically consists of 6 biodiversity topics that's aligned with our biodiversity journey. The first 3 modules is really more targeting the audience in terms of awareness, whereas your 4th, 5th, and 6th modules is more advanced, and it's really for your scientists and people that will actually be working with footprinting, accounting, target setting, reporting, and disclosure. Next slide, please. So in closing, biodiversity remains central to our sustainability efforts. Various initiatives were implemented over the years, though we recognize that significant more progress is needed. Key actions that support this commitment includes minimizing our environmental impact by reducing our ecological footprint. We believe that strategic partnerships with organizations like the Endangered Wildlife Trust is pivotal to strengthen biodiversity practices. We've spoken about capacity building. You need to continue with assessments and conservation initiatives. It's also important to align your goals with global biodiversity goals, such as the SDG and the international biodiversity targets. The adoption of frameworks like the TNFD is key and can provide steer in improving your overall management and practices. Also, technological innovation in this day and age is important, as you can use remote sensing and drones for monitoring and restoration. We've spoken a lot about collaboration and engagement today, and it's really, we believe that industry, governments, NGOs, everyone really needs to be part and parcel of this process to advance biodiversity in South Africa specifically. Transparent reporting guided by disclosure frameworks with measurable targets and progress tracking will also assist in this. So in closing, we really believe that, or we know that biodiversity is complex and it's resource intensive. So it requires a coordinated focus and sustained effort. Thank you.
Wow, you did exceedingly well. Thank you very much, Valerie. And I'm terribly sorry that we rushed it towards the end. But I think this just gives us a taste of what is out there, and we certainly will be moving forward in terms of having more webinars, and I'll ask Julie just to give us a way forward. But the slides will be made available to those who have attended today, so we will send the recording and the slides out to you later. But thank you very much for everybody that attended and also for the speakers. Julie, can I hand over to you for a way forward, and then I'll make the closing remarks. Thanks.
Thank you, Deirdre, and thank you to our speakers who gave excellent presentations. And we've got a much better understanding of our national and international obligations and how some of our members have approached biodiversity. Unfortunately, we haven't had time to take discussion or comment, but please send any comments that you have through to CAIA, and we will respond to those. And any suggestions on future webinars or any information that you would like further discussion around, we can make those arrangements. So I think that this is our start of our journey, and we will have a long road forward, and hopefully all together as a sector. So thank you. Thank you for attending today. Thanks, Deirdre.
Thanks, Julie. And I need to thank you in particular, who has driven and is responsible for biodiversity at CAIA. Sterling job done, and I really do appreciate the work that's gone in. Colleagues, can I just, in the next 30 seconds, and Julie has touched on this, to say what, to let us have topics or areas of that you would like covered. Would you like to see more webinars going forward? Just with a thumbs up, if I could just see what the interest would be around. Okay, I'm seeing quite a few. So I really would appreciate it if you could send through some of the topics and areas that you would like us to have webinars on. As I say, it won't be this year, but next year, when we've gone further down the journey, we will be having a biodiversity award as well. So I think the showcasing of what our members are doing, this, as I said, was just a taste of what is out there and a snapshot. And to both to Interwaste, to Bradley, and to Sasol, to Valerie, thank you very much. I am, as many of you know, a huge wildlife enthusiast. So I'm looking forward to more engagements and learning what our companies are doing, and maybe even do some site visits, which would be very encouraging. To Yassine, thank you again for your presentation, for BAS's commitment. It's much appreciated. David, for the sterling work that you do, and for a very comprehensive presentation on a number of areas. And then Edward, again, we want to say to you, thank you from the DFFE side for your presentation, but our commitment is there to collaborate and work with you. I think we've heard that along most of the presentations today, and we look forward to advancing this journey with everybody. So with those closing remarks, I'm hoping to see some questions that are coming through that we can answer or get the answers for you, as well as from topics that you would like us to address. I'm hoping we could do this I'm saying every month. I think Julie will shoot me if I say that, but certainly every 6 weeks to 2 months that we will have a topic. There is a very heavy calendar where we are dealing with a number of areas, but we do series, and we'd like to put a series together for biodiversity in terms of webinars. So thank you very much, and I apologize for going over time, but thank you for all that attended. And once again, thank you to the speakers for your time and your excellent presentations. The meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.